In Michigan, Jon Hoadley is running for Congress in the Kalamazoo area. I like a lot of things about Jon. He's been an activist, a small business owner. He's also been a state legislator for 6 years. So he has a sense of how legislation can work to improve people's lives. And now he wants to take that to Congress. Jon Hoadley. I am thrilled to welcome to Yang Speaks the congressional candidate for Michigan's 6th District, Mr. Jon Hoadley. Welcome, Jon.
It's so good to be here. Thanks, Andrew.
I'm a fan of yours in part because you're a small business owner. I think small business owners understand what's going on in our communities better than just about anyone. You've also been a state legislator in Michigan, which I also think is a fantastic uh, training ground because you get like the good, the bad, and the ugly. Can you tell us why you got into politics in the first place?
I should start by saying my family is that of like teachers and educators. So both my parents were professors. My sister, my cousins, aunts, they're teachers, and I watch over time how the profession has really changed. Growing up back then, my parents' paychecks were enough. But my sister actually ended up having to leave teaching because it barely covered her paycheck barely covered the cost of childcare. And and I found myself that, really stuck in this idea that we should be investing in the things that help us with the public good. And then personally, um, I my some of my first experiences with politics were having one of those school bond issues on the ballot and having it fail, and then thinking, who votes against schools? But a ton of people do. But actually, my friends and I, we started knocking doors and talking to people about it when we were in high school, and we got it passed the second time. And so it really showed me that if we do work, we can make change. And that became very personal for me when I came out and was doing work on LGBTQ equality issues before the national conversation was really happening. But I saw with all of that, when we come together, that and we tell authentic stories about how policies and politics impacts our lives, we can actually make a big difference and change people's minds on really important issues. And so I've been doing that ever since. I started a business and helped people do it. So I know what it's like to make a paycheck, to buy health insurance, pay taxes. And then ultimately, I ran for state representative thinking about how can I take those skills and advocate for even more people on these big issues.
I feel like it's a really big decision to run for state rep. What does that look like in Michigan? Like, how much did you like? What did you have to do? You'd be like, I'm going to run for state rep. Like, like,
Well, I think it's one of the things that for folks that are thinking about getting involved, raise your hand because there are people that want to help you. And, running for state representative in Michigan meant that I was going to be serving 93,000 people in the Kalamazoo area. And for me, that meant knocking on a whole bunch of doors because it turns out if you talk to people and ask for their vote, they like to have their opinion heard and they want you to do something about it. And, frankly, it's part of what we did to replicate our run for US Congress now. We said, well, since the current representative doesn't do town halls, let's go meet with people. Since the current representative only does very short meetings with folks who write big checks, why don't we actually try to go and get more voices involved in the campaign? And it seems to be paying off.
tell us about your opponent. So you're in the state house. You're doing your thing. We talked a little bit about this. Michigan is somewhat unusual in that it has term limits, I believe, of a certain duration. And so you look up and say, wait a minute, like my congressman could use an upgrade like in Michigan's 6th district. So who is your opponent? I believe he's the incumbent. And what does the race look like?
Yeah, so you're right, by the way. Michigan has the shortest, strictest term limits in the entire country. And, when you look, though, at someone who's been in office for 34 years, like Congressman Upton, you start to wonder, perhaps that's a bit too long. And, especially when
If we had term limits, I can verify that they'd be shorter than 34 years.
I think we all agree on that, then. So if, especially when it looks at the issues that he's choosing to spend his time on or the issues that he's avoiding doing any work on. And, for me, it was all about healthcare. My partner, Chris, has multiple sclerosis. And so we know what it feels like to have to fight with an insurance company who oftentimes has more power over your treatment than your doctor or you do.
That's essentially every American's living nightmare that unfortunately has come true for way too many of us.
Absolutely, right? And then, so I'm like, we get it. Everyone who is sitting there at the start of the year thinking, I sure hope my insurance, if I have it, covers the medication that is keeping me healthy. And every day I will tell you, someone is telling me a new story about how they're fighting with the insurance company to get a prescription covered and then denied, and then they're supposed to pay obscene amounts out of pocket, or they worry that, I mean, it's just all messed up. And my member of Congress actually voted 12 times to deny coverage for people with pre-existing conditions. He voted against lowering prescription drug costs. So I'm not sure why he expects people to vote for him this time around, especially during a global health pandemic.
Incumbents have a great win rate no matter what they do, more or less. I mean, like they've got a win rate of 90% plus. It's one reason why I love getting behind folks like you who would be a massive upgrade again over the incumbent, and just need people to have a chance to see you and meet you, if they're in Michigan 6th District in the Kalamazoo area. So they can do whatever they want a lot of the time. And when you say, like, I don't know how he expects people to vote for him, it's like, well, he figures he's got like a 7-digit moat, and maybe like maybe a district that is drawn in a way that would make him more confident.
Well, and we got lucky because we were a harder district to gerrymander since they couldn't move Lake Michigan or Indiana. But this is going to be a fight all the way to the finish line. I mean, like you said, dealing with incumbents are hard to beat, but we're on track to do it. So a couple of big pieces. The polling has been really constant. Fred Upton has hit a ceiling. He's never getting above 46, 47%. And despite the Republicans and outside groups running what's been called the most homophobic campaign in the country and lying about my record as a state legislator, we've actually been closing ground. So we are within the margin of error on the poll. He's up a few points on us. And now moving into the home stretch, here's what we know. 195,000 people have requested a ballot in my district. That's huge because 330,000 people total voted 4 years ago. Of that, over 100,000 people have already returned their ballots. We're going to have a huge voter turnout. And by the way, a big chunk of those are first-time voters. And when you look at the undecideds in the race, the biggest thing that we're seeing in the data is essentially they know enough about the guy that's been there for 34 years. They would like to know a little bit more about me. And so when we're still calling voters, when we're still running ads on the internet, on TV, it's actually helping people know who I am and that story of why I'm involved. So we've got a bit of a funding gap for this last, few days. And frankly, at this point, contributions are huge because it lets us ramp up and continue to go into additional segments of voters who just don't know enough about me yet, but are inclined to vote for me if they do. We expanded our voting rights in Michigan. So this is going to be the first election where everybody can vote by mail if they want to, where anybody can do same-day voter registration. So some of these things that take away the power from the incumbent to actually put it back in the people's hands, we're going to be able to use them this time. And this feels like the year where people definitely want to see some change.
Your race is one of the most important, fascinating races in the country in my mind, because it's Michigan and it's a swing state. You're in a competitive race and district. Everyone knows that I ran on universal basic income. Where are you on cash relief during the pandemic and thereafter?
Well, that's one of the things I really like about you. And it's an idea that I've talked about for a while because
you were actually for universal basic income even before I came along, if I remember right.
Yeah. And it's an important part of this conversation, especially in a place like Michigan that's had to deal with automation, outsourcing, a number of issues that we just haven't been able to respond to as fast as we need to. And then the rest of the country saw really firsthand how we've put Band-Aids over the current global health pandemic where, we're asking people to delay evictions, but we didn't find a way to backfill those lost revenue. And I'm a legislator. I've served on the Appropriations Committee. I know very well what is facing us in terms of all of the downstream impacts that this is going to have and how so many of these things could have been avoided with having some consistent, predictable, basic cash relief. Like, by the way, so many other countries did throughout this pandemic.
The reason why you're such an ideal member of Congress is you're just genuinely a caring person who wants to improve people's lives. And if we put you in a position of power, like I know you'll just take that as your framework, being like, hey, is this going to help the people in my district? And if so, great. And then if not, why are we talking about it?
That's right. I mean, right, the idea that we should put people and community at the center of the decisions being made in Washington, D.C. shouldn't be a novel concept, but unfortunately, it is groundbreaking in a place like Michigan's 6th congressional district. But hey, one last thing for everybody listening. We're seeing huge movement here. For anybody that wants to help us, talk to voters, call, text, we've got a ton of opportunities over at jonhoadley.com on the Join Us tab. And we've got people that are connecting with voters every single day, and it turns out it's making a huge difference, and we need your help to get over the finish line. So just
JonHoadley.com. That's John, HOADLEY.com. If you want to help John get into Congress and beat this 34-year Republican incumbent who I suspect has not been doing a great job for quite some time.
That's what we're hearing. That is what we're hearing.